I finally got my hands on this Head Gravity 98 Tour. It's just called the Gravity Tour, and it's replacing the previous model, which was a 100 square inch 18 by 20. It was virtually the same racket as the Gravity Pro, but a little bit stiffer, a little bit lighter. And I think that racket just wasn't that popular. Maybe Head knew it, maybe some of the American retailers knew it, because that wasn't a racket you could just buy in America. However, it was available in the EU and Australia, potentially some other markets. But it makes sense that the Gravity Pro would be a much more popular version of the racket because of the endorsements and, well, maybe it's a little more committed to the 18 by 20 design for the kind of racket it is. I don't know. Point being, I don't think there was enough separation between the Pro and the Tour. Now there is, because now the Tour is a 98 16 by 19. And for what this racket is, the string pattern is quite open, but there are some changes. Let's talk about it. Obviously, one of the biggest changes to the racket is the cosmetic. We have gloss finish now as opposed to matte. And I think the paint itself is actually very pretty, if you will. There's kind of this cosmic glittery effect. I don't really care for these hard lines right here. Sometimes I feel like Head is just kind of stuck in this box of these paint jobs that have this kind of line through it. I think it's hard to paint a racket in a way that's really iconic. There just isn't much surface area to work with and do a lot with the paint job. So you either do something kind of obnoxious or really eye-catching, but I think you start pushing the boundaries on what is necessarily appealing to the eye. And you gotta freshen up your paint job every couple years or so. They have the colored portion on one side be the negative space on the other side. In other words, when you flip the racket from one side to the other, it's kind of the opposite version of the paint, if that makes sense. See how the throat on this side is colored below here, and then on that side exactly, it is actually just black. So that's fun, I guess. That's something I noticed, but those are just cosmetics, superficial details, right? And as we said, smaller head, but a much more open string pattern. Not only is it a 16 by 19, but it is a relatively openly spaced 16 by 19, more than most. Tencom was wise to point out that it is wider or more open of a spacing than his Rafa, which, you know, just based on what it is, you might assume that is the more open string pattern. So it's good to put string spacing into proper context, because just saying a 16 by 19 is a more open pattern than an 18 by 20, it's really not that simple, because at least for some generation of Yonex and Head rackets, there was a time where the Yonex E-Zone 98 had a more densely spaced 16 by 19 string pattern than the Head Speed Pro, which was an 18 by 20. And I dare say the Head Speed Pro, at least that generation, might have gotten more spin because of that more open spacing, even though the string pattern itself was more dense. Real quick here, I will talk about some changes in the grommets. At the top, the most notable change in the grommet system is the head guard here. You have a very thin, tiny channel. It's kind of resembling the Head Prestige rackets. Before, that top channel was much more open, and in some ways I feel like that created a bit of drag. If I were to swing really hard, I could almost hear like a deep whoosh, whoosh. It just sounded like that racket was catching a lot of air and maybe was slowing itself down just a little bit, whereas, you know, rackets like the Pure Aero and stuff really optimize themselves for aerodynamics, and I feel like the harder you swing, the more that kind of detail actually matters. If people are going to stress about a gram or so of weight on the tip of your racket affecting swing weight and slowing down your swing speed, I feel like it's totally worth stressing a little bit about how much drag is happening at the top of your racket. Because if a little drag is something you think doesn't matter, but 1 gram on the tip of your racket you think matters a lot, I feel like there's a little bit of appreciation that should actually go both ways. I think that's a good change. Some people said that the new grommet actually made it so this racket makes a whistling sound. I was not able to replicate that. Maybe that's going to depend on the racket. Maybe that's going to depend on other things. I don't know. Another change regarding the grommets. Let's talk about parallel drilling. You guys know I care a lot about that. I think the best possible version of a racket will have as much parallel drilling as reasonably possible. And the funny thing is that the Head rackets are actually really great about implementing this. I don't want to explain what parallel drilling is in every single video that I bring it up, but I do have some content on it. But I'll say real quick that parallel drilling essentially drills the holes in a way on the racket that cooperate more with the natural path of the string when you apply tension. Because if you just do standard drilling and the string comes in like this, but it wants to straighten out because you're applying tension, it kind of has to force itself around that curve right on the inner hoop and throughout the racket. I think that's kind of dumb. I think it strains the racket. I think it shrinks your sweet spot a little bit. And from an engineering perspective, I feel like it's just kind of amateur or unprofessional. So I respect a racket that implements parallel drilling more than one that doesn't. But at the end of the day, it's not the most important detail to me. However, the previous version of the Head Gravities all had parallel drilling like pretty much across the entire top of the hoop. So it's funny that this one no longer has that. Like, they still have parallel drilling here on the 3 and the 9 and on the throat, which is required. Every racket needs parallel drilling on the throat, or else you can't put that throat grommet in. The previous Head Gravity, all the models, had parallel drilling at the top, and this one just doesn't have any, and I don't know why. Like, is that a progressive decision to have your later model gravities not have parallel drilling up here when all the previous versions had parallel drilling up there? I don't understand. Is that a design oversight, or is that a design decision that was consciously made, or just something that didn't really matter? I don't know. But in my opinion, that is a shortcoming and a slight downgrade on this racket. So I approve of the smaller channel up here. I think that favors aerodynamics more. I do not approve of this standard drilling up here, especially when their previous versions had parallel drilling. And obviously they still believe in parallel drilling because they're doing it along most of the grommet holes on the 3 and the 9. So why not at the top? You did before, why not now? Doesn't make any sense to me. So with all those critiques and observations out of the way, let's talk about how it plays. I think it's a very balanced racket. Plenty of racket models come to mind that are kind of in the ballpark of something like this, but for what this is, I think it favors spin a little bit more than some of those options would. So what do I mean by that? Most of the racket is designed around being a very middle ground racket, like not too much power, not too much really anything. It doesn't have any spectacular traits that really blow your opponent off the court with its power or something like that. It's one of those rackets where you get what you give. And just off the bat, one racket that I feel is actually quite similar to this is the RF01. Now I do think the string pattern on this is a little bit more openly spaced, it favors spin a bit more, but otherwise, honestly, it's a pretty darn similar racket. So the spin is quite good. The string pattern, like I said, is quite open and that favors spin. However, certain traits like the flex of this racket don't necessarily favor the spin. So you'll get your spin from the string pattern, but maybe not as much as you would from a stiffer frame. So a racket like the Pure Aero 98, even though it's a 16 by 20, still a pretty open pattern, spacing wise, is probably going to get more spin than this. And a racket like the Dunlop SX, the newest model of which I just demoed and will review soon, definitely gets more spin than this. But I will say that the spin is decently above average. Tencom, shoutouts Tencom, said in his video that this racket plays quite a lot like the VCore 98 does. And you know what? I think that's a really good comparison. I think that this racket is a bit more flexible and it's a little bit more control tilted than the VCore 98, but that is also a very fair comparison. And my contribution to that comparison would be that this racket, in my opinion, is very similar to the RF01. And you know what? I will bring up a couple of other racket models here just to put this into perspective. I thought about the new Pure Strike line. This is definitely, in my opinion, a little bit more firm and more spin friendly than any of the Pure Strike models out right now. I think something like the Yonex Percepts are a little bit closer to something like this, specifically like the 97 and 100 models, but it's definitely softer and not quite as spin friendly as something like a Pure Aero 98. And my reference racket is the Black Ace 105 by ProKenX, which definitely gets more spin than this and it has more stability than this. Not to say you couldn't add some weight to this, but you know, just straight off the shelf, it's not like the most stable and penetrating, heavy hitting racket. But there is some room to play with the weight. You can definitely tweak this racket to be more of something than it is stock. So yeah, performance all around is pretty balanced, but unless that excites you, I don't know if this racket is inherently super exciting because it stands out in any particular way. But plenty of people are looking for that middle ground racket with a little something, and maybe this is that in terms of the spin that it generates. One of my favorite things about the head gravity racket specifically is actually this head shape. I think it's really clever to open up the sweet spot and actually move it up, this teardrop shape that they call it. I think that's a really smart design choice. One of the reasons I liked extended length rackets was the extra reach, but if you are effectively moving the sweet spot up with a clever head shape like this, you can enjoy a little bit of extra reach by moving that ideal contact zone slightly higher in the string bed without actually having to make your racket longer. So that's cool. I really like that. If I were to design my perfect racket, I would very likely take a lot of notes from the head gravity teardrop shape. So that's something that head has that nobody else has, and I respect that. And some people might compare it to the isometric head shape, but I think that the teardrop design is a little bit better than Yonex's isometric shape. Over the years, Yonex has definitely backed away from how isometric their rackets look. And I also personally feel that like the more square these corners become, the more I feel like it dilutes the sweet spot. So you might actually make the sweet spot bigger, but I don't know if it really makes that sweet spot feel juicy or precise. I think it's good to think in extremes sometimes. If you made this racket head like a literal square, don't you think that a literal square would perform so much worse than an actual oval shape like this? And so when I think about that, I feel like anything closer to a square is going to perform less good, or less well, I should say, than something that actually respects the rounded corner shape of a teardrop design like this or a standard oval head shape. Just my opinion, and that's kind of how I feel about Yonex rackets when I play with them. I do want to say, since I'm comparing rackets here, I feel like the Black Ace Pro from ProKenX could actually be a racket that offers so many of the things you might want if you are gravitated towards a racket like this, pun intended. But I feel like the gravity falls a little bit short compared to the Black Ace Pro. The Black Ace Pro has the balanced traits that might attract you to a racket like this, but I feel like it offers a little bit more. It's got a little more pop. I think it has better feel. And I think that kinetic technology actually does quite a lot to offset some of the compromises of a more flexy racket. So the Black Ace Pro almost feels like you can have a flexy control-oriented racket but still enjoy power because of the kinetic technology. So you have that comfort, you have that control, and you have that touch, but when you're really swinging the racket, you do have that power. And I feel like that's not quite as true on this racket. And I'm not trying to push you to that racket necessarily. I do have a 10% discount code with ProKennex if you want to order it there. That's great. You can save 10%, which is like $50 or so. It's pretty good. Free shipping as well. But I'm really just saying that if you like this racket, or you're curious about this racket, or this kind of racket for the things that this racket offers, you really should also check out the Black Ace Pro. And if we're going to talk about paint jobs, again, I feel like the Black Ace series has one of the coolest paint jobs to ever happen on a racket. So far, that opinion remains unchallenged, for good reason. And yeah, that's essentially my impressions of this racket. I don't have too much more to say. I will mention that this racket was strung with o-toro in the mains and Enso Pro in the crosses. You can see the colors here. It's green and pink. And I strung it pretty low. I've been going lower tension these days. The strings I use are very durable and they hold tension better than most strings, especially Restring Zero and Sync, but I did use Tourline here and I went mid 40s. I think like 45, 42. I'm going lower in the crosses now. And I've been back and forth on tension, hybrid tension specifically. I think I've come to my final conclusion. I will explain why in a future video, so definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, this actually felt really good. Good feel, good pocketing. I feel like I got pretty much as much spin out of this racket as you can with this string setup or something like it. Highly recommend this string setup. o-toro is definitely one of the masterpiece strings from Tourline. If you like Restring Zero and Sync, I also highly recommend o-toro. If you want to know more about the Tourline strings, you can check out a video I did on that not too long ago. And they have since come out with a couple of new colors, which I will review in some future content. And before we fully wrap up this video, let me tell you about this little bag I got, all right? This is where I've been keeping my tennis gear recently. This is like a more compact version of my tennis setup. This is one of the Black Ace bags from ProKennex. I'm not gonna talk about it here too much, but it's my favorite bag from ProKennex. I've tried all their bags. This one's my favorite. I had somebody also ask me like if this is a good tennis bag with a laptop case, and it does actually have a laptop sleeve inside of here. Inside this bag, I've been keeping this massage gun handy. It's by Bob and Brad. I was sent this massage gun for review purposes, and I actually really like it. I have a Theragun here, and the Theragun was a massage gun that I compared to the rest of the market at similar price points or cheaper, and I felt like the Theragun was just so much better than everything else. It wasn't even close. It's too bad that I didn't try that Bob and Brad massage gun at the time, because had I tried it, I would have realized that that's actually a very good and price competitive option compared to that Theragun, which is actually quite expensive. I don't quite know how that price is justified on the Theragun, if I'm being honest, except for that at the time I didn't really know anything that compared. So I think this is actually a really great thing to keep in your bag. I've been keeping it in mine. The thing that really stands out about this is the tip here, which is actually powered separately, rechargeable, and it has a setting where you can choose for it to be cold or hot. And I was surprised, how can you use electricity to keep something cold? But it does. Press this little button here, turns red, or orange first and then red, so you have heat settings, right? Or you can press that snowflake button and a little fan will turn on, which keeps the tip of this quite cold. So whether you want a hot or a cold massage, you have that option with this tip here. Yeah, it's honestly quite cold. That's surprising. Oh, you know what? There's two settings for that as well. You guys want to hear my voice when I'm massaging my neck? Anyway, if you guys want to buy a nice massage gun, I think this is one of the best ones you can buy. I've tested quite a bit of the market, and I also own a Theragun. I think this is just as good as a Theragun, if not better, especially at the price point, specifically because it has this temperature-controlled tip. And yeah, all these other tips, you can imagine what the use case for these tips might be. Rechargeable, USB-C, and again, very portable. And the link for this is actually for Amazon. So you can follow that link, put that in your cart and check it out. Let me know if you like it. It supports me and the channel, but again, I really do stand by this. I only talk about products that I stand by. Do you guys have any idea how many products get sent to me that don't make it as far? As a product plug, Bob and Brad massage gun, it's legit. I keep it in my bag. Doesn't take up much space. You'll be glad that you have it. Oh, and you know what? I should have brought the Black Ace Pro for this when I'm sitting in front of the chair, but you know what? That's what B-roll footage is for. We're gonna put that Black Ace Pro footage in here, even though it's not with me right now. But I do have with me right now the Black Ace 105. This is my racket of choice. Amazing racket. I will also review this soon, but I'm just letting you guys know that so you can see how beautiful it is, but mostly so that you know what my main racket is. And it used to be the Pure Aero 98 and the Dunlop SX 300/300 Tour, but no longer. And we'll see actually which one is ultimately my favorite. It's probably between this and the Black Ace Pro. even though they're pretty different rackets. All right, that's all for now. I will see you guys in a future video. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment if you have questions, and I will see you guys then. Be sure to check out all the links below. A lot of good products there. Anything you get supports the channel, and I appreciate you very much. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.